Good morning and welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all doing well. We've got some pretty abysmal weather here in Kent today. It's howling a gale, it's pouring down with rain, and it's not conducive to going outside and doing much photography unless you've got a completely waterproof camera. So I'm going to do a video on some of the new gear that I've got. As you well know, I bought a FujiFilm GFX100 a few weeks ago. After umming and ahhing over my Sony equipment, I finally made the complete trade over to the GFX, and I've had it now about 5 weeks, and I want to talk to you about some of the pros and cons of it. The main pro, as far as I'm concerned, is the sensor is absolutely stunning, being a medium format camera. I'm getting image quality that is very good, to say the least, and 100 megapixels gives me an awful lot of options for sort of cropping if I want to, and still having an image of good resolution. It also is allowing me to have some really nice colors. I think Fuji's color profiling in camera is really very good. I know they've got different film simulations, but I tend to stick to the standard one because I don't want to end up with a raw file that's been manipulated. I want to have the raw file as basic as possible so I can apply my own sort of color profile or my own interpretation of the colors into the picture. And what I've also bought recently, you might have noticed that's quite a small lens on there, and that is definitely not. That is a Minolta 35 to 70 zoom lens, which won't, it zooms, but it's got no aperture control from the camera. It's got this adapter which has got a rotating ring on it, you can probably see there, which allows me to alter the aperture on the lens. It also has no autofocus with the GFX because this is a completely dumb adapter. It has no interaction with the camera, so I'm then down to manually focusing, which, given what I do most of the time, isn't really a big issue. I would prefer if it could transfer the information between. It also means I don't get any EXIF information in Lightroom related to what the lens was set to, which is a little bit of a chore, but let me explain my reasoning for having this, and I'll show you some more lenses in a moment. This little Minolta lens is second hand. I got it on eBay. It's cost me £35, which is bugger all of nothing in real terms, and I know it's cropping, or at least not cropping, but it's causing vignette at either end of the zoom, but not so much in the middle, only a little bit, and I can correct for that. It's not the sharpest lens in the world, but it is small. That is really quite tiny compared to, this is the 32 to 64, which is approximately 24 to 50, so it's the 35 to 70 is a 2 times, this is a 24 to 50, so it's 2 times. That is the lens, that is the GFX's GF 32 to 64 lens. And if you just compare them in terms of size, I think you can appreciate that this is massively smaller, this Minolta lens, plus as well, well, you can see it's quite heavy. It really is quite a heavy lens. That is my go-to standard lens on the GFX. Now, you may be wondering why buy cheaper lenses to put on a camera of this quality. The reason behind that is that, one, they're cheap, therefore I can sort of almost consider them expendable, so I don't need to be as careful. I can go out in conditions to use this with this lens on that I wouldn't perhaps like to with the more expensive lens. Just to put it into perspective, this 62 to 34, 32 to 64 lens new is about £2,300. I picked all my lenses up from my GFX second hand through MPB. It's a British company. I traded all the Sony equipments, and I actually picked up all the lenses. Although I bought the body new, I actually bought second hand lenses, and this cost me, I think, about £1,500, which is a fairly significant saving on buying it new from the, and it is effectively new, as you can probably see. I don't know if you can, but there's not a mark on it. It's absolutely perfect optically. It shows no sign of use at all, so why spend the extra money? The original lenses I bought with the GFX are the 100 to 200 zoom, which is that, which with the lens hood on is quite a big beast, and given the size of the aperture for the camera to fit on is really quite insanely large, but it's necessary for the sorry, it's necessary for the full frame, sorry, not full frame, the medium format sensor. And the other lens I got, so I've got 32 to 64, which is full frame equivalent of about 24 to 50. I've got the 100 to 200, which is full frame equivalent of approximately 80 to 160. And I bought this single prime lens, again second hand, which is the 23mm Fujifilm GF lens. And that's because that gives me roughly the same thing as a 16mm lens. It's not as wide as a 12mm in full frame format or full frame terms, but I needed to go wider than 24mm. I'd used Lightroom to analyze a lot of my images taken over the years, and I categorized them and I created filters to see which sort of focal length ranges the different shots were taken at, and I realized that I do quite a lot of shots in the sort of medium to ultra wide angle range. So I can't go down to 12mm, but I certainly regularly take shots at 16mm. So this is equivalent of 17mm in full frame, so this is why I've got this one. So I think some of you will have seen on another video I did a few weeks ago, I also bought this. Minolta is not deliberate, it's simply because Minolta have Sony A mount, and the adapter I've got is a Sony A mount adapter, so I can put Minolta A mount lenses on. This is a beautiful little mirror lens which I bought second hand again. It came from Japan directly. I think I paid about £220 for this, and this is a 500mm reflex lens f8, and it's absolutely tack sharp if you focus it correctly, and by that I mean the depth of field is so incredibly narrow, you have to be very careful how you use this. So that's one lens that I bought with it, and this also has a removable, if I can get it out, probably not. This little piece here is a removable filter holder, which I don't have a filter in. I've also bought, apart from the Minolta 35 to 70, I bought a Minolta, again Sony A mount, 75 to 300 zoom lens. That takes me past the lens, the Fujifilm lens at 200, which is equivalent to 180. So I can now go out to 300mm with this. And then topping off the top end, I've got the 500mm mirror lens. And this is a very cheap little lens. It's an autofocus lens again, or at least, no, this is a manual. No, it's not, it's autofocus, it's got the little connectors on the back. It's a manual focus from my perspective lens, and optically it works really quite well. It's not quite as good as the Fuji's lenses, but again, it's small and it's light, and it means that when I'm just sort of going out, if I'm on the bike for instance and want to take a series of lenses, I'll probably take these lenses because they are much lighter. I've got an ultra wide lens coming for Minolta. It's the 17 to 35, and again I paid nothing for these. This 75 to 300 cost me £35 second hand, and it's as good as new. There's not a mark on it, optically perfect and everything. And the 17 to 35 cost me, I think it was about £32, and it's coming from Japan. I believe the tracking information suggests I'll have it tomorrow, but we'll see how that performs. And when I've got all these lenses compared, or at least in my hands, I'm going to do a video about the difference in optical quality. I know, I appreciate I can't use these lenses with their autofocus capability, which in itself is a bit of a limitation, but I see a place for these in my lineup of lenses, filling the gaps between the lenses that Fuji have, which their lens range for the GFX is a little bit limited. It's certainly at the the long lens end and the very wide end it's limited. So those are the lenses I've got with this camera so far, and I'm very pleased with them. I'm particularly pleased that the Minolta lenses didn't cost me very much, which might seem a bit mean when you've spent best part of £10,000 on a camera body and a series of lenses, which is roughly what that lot cost me. To put a cheap lens on It's madness. You'll all think I'm stupid, but I like to try things, and at the end of the day I haven't spent much money on these, and I can always sell them on if I don't get on with them or don't want to use them anymore. But so back to the Fujifilm itself, the GFX100. As a lot of YouTube-y type people like Adam Gibbs and Thomas Heaton and various people have done, they've all moved over to this. That didn't influence me in my decision to buy one. As you've watched several videos before, you'll have seen that I've been umming and ahhing about this, and I had one on order when they first were announced. Things I like. What I like is it's got this display on top here that shows even when it's turned off, because it's I think it's called it's like a Kindle. The image can stay even when the power's not there. I think it's called an ink display or something. So it's got this display which shows me all sorts of features and values which when it's turned on I can alter, obviously. And it's got a permanent stills and movie button on the front, which irrespective, well, dependent on which of the two settings you have it in, it remembers the settings appropriate for that particular mode. So if I'm doing some videoing, it remembers how I've got that set up perfectly, switch across to stills, and it remembers the last set of settings I had for stills, which is really good. Now, what else does it have? It's slightly larger than my Sony A1. It's not actually as heavy as the Sony A1. I think I weighed them out at a couple of grams different. It's hardly anything. I particularly like this screen on the back because the Sony couldn't tip sideways, and I often take portrait shots, and I want to have the I want to be able to look down, get the camera low and look down at the image I'm taking, which is difficult with the Sony because unless you have it this way on and pivoted out this way, which is the only motion a Sony could do, and I know the new A7 IV has got a fully articulated screen, which I hope comes into the other models in the range in the near future. But I like the screen. It flips out completely flat as well as downwards, and as well as to an extent sideways, which covers a lot of options that my Sony couldn't do. Now, this has got something the Sony definitely didn't have, and I value this a lot. It's got in-camera focus stacking. This only works with the autofocus lenses because what it does is it manipulates the focal point and moves it through the image. So you set a near point and a far point, and it will calculate based on the aperture how many steps it would need to take, how many separate images at different focal points it will have to take to get that from the point, the nearest point to the furthest point, completely in focus. It doesn't blend them in camera, which obviously is a massive ask on the internal processing capability. When I did one video a few weeks ago where I tried this out, and it took somewhere in the region of 45 images to go from about a metre in front of me to about 30 metres in front at f11. It needed 40 odd something images. So you can imagine the camera, it would be asking far too much of it to focus blend all those together. So that's a post-production exercise. I use Helicon Focus mainly, and that does an incredibly good job. You just have to drink a lot of coffee while you're waiting for it to happen. So that is one major plus that it has. It does focus bracketing on the camera. I've used it quite a bit and I really like that. The other thing it can do film bracketing, so the different film simulation modes, it can bracket between them for you if you want. I can't think why. It can do ISO bracketing, it can do white point bracketing. In other words, it's got quite a few bracketing options that simply just don't exist in the Sony. I've got to question their value. The bracketing one for focus is fine, I understand that, and I can see a use for it, but not many of the others. Exposure bracketing is standard in most cameras, and it can do that as well. Next feature that I really like is the shutter speed can go from, I think, 4,000th of a second, quote me if I'm wrong or correct me if I'm wrong, but it can go right up to quite long exposures in camera. You're not stuck with a 30-second exposure maximum shutter speed that you would have been. You can put it into bulb mode and just set the value you want, and it then carries out that, so it could be a 10 or 20 or 30 minute or an hour exposure if the battery lasted that long. Battery life, that's an interesting one. It's not quite as good as it was on my Sony. The batteries are similar size, but this is a bulkier camera. And yes, as I was saying, the focus bracketing is particularly useful. I appreciate that that only works with these Fuji lenses, so if I put any of these cheaper Minolta lenses on, I have to do it manually. But in terms of a capability, that is an awesome capability. I think an Olympus OMD EM1 Mark II I had a few years ago had the same capability. There is one thing that particular camera had which I would love to see in another camera, or most cameras, in fact, especially the ones I own, is you could set it into live view mode for a long exposure. So you'd start a long exposure and you wouldn't stop it until the histogram, because on the back of the screen you could see the image developing effectively, and the histogram would slowly creep from the dark side as the image built up over time until it was touching the right hand side. Then you could hit the stop button, so you got a perfectly exposed long exposure. I don't know why other people don't do that. It's such an obvious thing to do when you're doing a 5 or 8 or 10 minute exposure, for instance, with a ND1000 on, or whatever 10 stop filter or 6 stop filter, just to be able to see that you've got exactly the right exposure is so nice. But no one else has done it, which is a bit of a shame. Anyway, so that's a sort of a run through of what I've got at the moment and how I'm using it. I'm very pleased with the Fuji GFX. It's giving me a lot of capability. My biggest downside is the weight, and it's got to be said, these lenses are not light. They're definitely not light. The body is round about the same weight as the body on my A7, or my A1 and my A7R4, but the lenses are just so huge. There's so much glass in them, there's so much metalwork to hold it all together, that they are seriously heavy. Anyway, I'll give you an update in a few months when I've had a bit more time to use it. I'm hoping to go in January, if we don't get COVIDed down again and locked in, to northern Norway, and I will be taking this beast with me, and also taking my son as a bit of a treat, which will be nice for him. It'd be nice for me to have the company, and I'm hoping in that beautiful part of the world I'll be able to get some images with this beast. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the update, as long-winded as it is, listening to this old duffer talking about camera equipment. So we'll see you on the next video. Please remember to give it a thumbs up if you liked it, and give it a thumbs up if you didn't like it. Not a thumbs down, we don't like that. And we'll see you on the next video.